Support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere comes from MX Publishing, with the largest catalog of new Sherlock Holmes books in the world. New novels, biographies, graphic novels, and short story collections about Sherlock Holmes. Find them at mxpublishing.com.
And by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com.
And from listeners like you, who support us through Patreon. Bonus material, thank you gifts, and more await at patreon.com/ihearofsherlock. I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 251. What child is this?
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Hello there, and welcome once again to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, I mean, it seems like a natural question for me to ask, given the title of this episode, but what child is this?
Well, it's that one over there. It's the one.
Oh, we're audio only, I forgot. So you can't see me holding this one up.
It's the one spinning the top and looking at the sandbox critically.
Yes, well, we have a gem of an episode for you here today, speaking with Bonnie MacBird about her latest book, What Child Is This? Seems like an apt opportunity, too, for us to recall our last episode, our 250th. What a barn burner that was. We had a great time, and we actually had a couple of outtakes episodes that we produced. Not just one, but two outtakes episodes, because that's how we think of our listeners here. You deserve so much more than we typically give. So you can check those out on Patreon or Substack if you're a PayPal supporter. But if you're a Patreon supporter, you can get it right there in the Patreon interface. We're also running, I think we're running a poll. We have some additional information to ask you about. In another bonus episode, we actually have a collection of books. We have 6 books that are here in the iHose vaults that, are just taking up too much space, and we thought, what a great opportunity to thank our Patreon supporters. We are going to ask you to identify some voices, and we'll have that in an extra post over on Patreon. We'll also post it on our Substack for our PayPal supporters as well. If you can answer the questions that we have in that bonus post, then we have 6 books that will be made available to you. They are, the Sherlock Holmes Little Book of Wisdom, Maria Konikova's Mastermind, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes. We've got the Basil Rathbone autobiography, In and Out of Character, a copy of William Baring Gould's Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street, Hesketh Pearson's biography, Conan Doyle, and finally, this should really pique your interest, listeners. We have a battered old copy of Winwood Reade's The Martyrdom of Man. So if you know that one, that is from the canon itself. Sherlock Holmes, I believe, mentioned the martyrdom of man in, was it the very first story? Is in A Study in Scarlet? I'm fuzzy on my Winwood Reed.
Oh, me too. I don't remember. Could be. I thought it was in Sign of Four, but it could be.
That could be right. That could be right. Look it up, Watson. You really should. But anyway, that collection of books will be yours if you come out on top from this challenge that we are issuing to all of our supporters. So either join us at patreon.com/ihearofsherlock or via PayPal, and we will make that bonus material available to you. Bonnie MacBird is a writer and artist who had a Hollywood career that included 4 years as a feature film development executive at Universal. She wrote the original screenplay for the movie Tron. She's won 3 Emmy Awards for documentary writing and producing and 11 Cine Gold Eagles for scripted and documentary work. Art in the Blood was her first Sherlock Holmes novel, published in 2015 by HarperCollins. The series continued with Unquiet Spirits in 2017, The Devil's Due in 2019, and The Three Locks in 2020. And now we have her 5th Sherlock Holmes adventure, a Christmas novella called What Child Is This? In addition to her writing, Bonnie has worked in theater extensively as a playwright, actor, and director. She studied Shakespeare in the United States and the United Kingdom, and is also an accomplished watercolorist. Bonnie teaches a popular screenwriting class at UCLA's Extension School. She's a regular speaker internationally on writing, creativity, and Sherlock Holmes. She received her investiture, Art in the Blood, from the Baker Street Irregulars in 2017, and is married to computer scientist Alan Kay, splitting her time between her homes in Los Angeles and London. Bonnie MacBird, welcome back to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here.
Well, we are pleased to have you back. As I inferred there, you were with us on episode 83, talking about your first novel, Art in the Blood, and back on episode 132 for Unquiet Spirits. So we are pleased to have you back here for novel number 5. This is amazing. So talk to us a little bit about what motivates you to keep writing these Sherlock Holmes books.
Oh, that's funny. I don't know. I just love doing it, Scott. I mean, I did it kind of as a recovery activity after an illness, the first book, and I guess I just got, I don't know, in the habit. And HarperCollins asked for another one, and then another one, and so the series has just progressed. And I have to say that, especially in these troubled times, I love spending time on Baker Street with these two brilliant guys.
That's really lovely, because we talk to so many writers, and sometimes we'll talk to a writer who will say, I hate writing. I mean, this is really, I hate it. What I like is the editing. It just takes me forever to sit down. But boy, that's wonderful, because it really is. I mean, it can be, can't it? A lovely escape to the cozy Victorian era and this surround and this characters, and it's restorative to you as a writer, isn't it? So that's I think more like it.
It is, I actually love writing, and that's not to say it isn't hard work. It is, but I don't just dash off. Somebody once told me that they thought of me as a writer sitting in an outdoor cafe with a glass of white wine, casually penning things, and I'm like, no. It's actually hours and hours of work, but it is pleasurable. It is what I love to do, and so one of the things I do is the first thing I do when I get up in the morning is I make coffee, I sit down, and I start work on the book.
Oh, that's wonderful. See, we talked about that in one of our conversations with you. I remember we talked about the experience of flow, and, which you had dug into with the books from Csikszentmihalyi, I remember. So you have this flow experience of writing. Time passes for you, and suddenly you realize you've been doing it for 2 hours, and you look up.
It's a habit now to write, so I do automatically click into kind of just full on concentration. flow doesn't happen reliably every single day, but it happens often enough, and it is really pleasurable because you really don't know what time it is. I write to word count, so one of the things that I do is, instead of really angsting about figuring out whether I hit my mark or I'm really working or or some other kind of judgment about what I'm doing, I just go like, I'm going to do X number of words a day, and I just hit that mark. And if I'm on a roll, I just keep going. But if I'm if I'm not, I just stop, and I've hit my mark. I've done it. So it's kind of a it takes the onus away of like constantly judging. Did I get enough done? Was it good enough? And all this stuff.
What's your minimum count? Are you 1,000-word a day writer?
No, currently I'm 500 words a day. That's very slow. I often will do more than that, up to 2,000, 3,000, but I don't feel the need to do that. I'm working kind of more as a tortoise than a hare, but I get there. And I've been reliably, I wrote 2 books during lockdown. So I feel like my system's working.
Yeah, I guess so.
And partly it's I've dialed back the word count because there's a lot of research involved. It isn't just generating the story and just generating pages. It's because I weave back and forth between actually drafting and then going back to finding the research of the stuff that I need, and then being inspired by that and going back. And so it just is a process that really, really works for me. And when I describe it to people, they go, "Oh, that's hardly any words at all." I can do that. But I teach writing, and one of the things that is so helpful is to set a goal for yourself that's attainable. And then when you attain it reliably every single day, boom, 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 you set up this pattern, this winning pattern, and you just stay with it. Whereas if you set the goal too high and you start missing, you think, "Oh, I'll make up tomorrow," and then you don't, and then you fall further behind, and then and you set up a different kind of mindset to yourself that I'm not done, I didn't do enough, and blah, blah, blah. So this is kind of a weird psychology, but it really works.
Yeah,
It's
it
wonderful.
sounds like it does.
I don't think it's weird. One of the things I noticed in your book, in your introduction, and in the people that you thanked for this, there was a writing group mentioned. Can you talk a little bit about that? I was really curious about that.
Yeah, I think anybody who's serious about writing and is writing professionally should have or form a crit group. I'm a member of a crit group in Los Angeles. Of course, we meet on Zoom now, and we just meet every Friday evening in London, morning in LA, and we basically bring in our pages, we read them aloud, and people give you very, very good counsel on these pages. They're tough. They're all professionals. They're all published people, and they're tough, but they're fair because they're all writers themselves. So, and then I formed a second group that meets actually on Monday nights because I really find these useful. The second group was originally comprised of a bunch of writers who used to be my students and who are now writing professionally. And so that second group meets on Mondays, and it's the same kind of thing, really. And I think it's just so invaluable because you have to kind of have some pages ready to show. So, it's like homework is due, and it has to be good enough because you're going to read it aloud. You don't want to embarrass yourself, right? So it's got to be above a certain threshold. You can bring things in a draft form, though, and that you could. So sometimes people will bring in pages and go like, "Okay, this is early days. This is like my second draft here," or other times they're going like, "I think I'm done here. Tell me if this is working." So you can solicit comments at various levels of your work, and it's a fabulous process, really.
There's nothing like peer pressure to keep you accountable, is there?
No, that's exactly right.
So, Bonnie, I'm curious. Lots of things I want to ask you, but in terms of the 500-word minimum that you put in per day, do you find that is more helpful with your editing process when you go back and you need to rework your words, or do you kind of stay on the same kind of level in terms of writing and editing?
No, the editing is an entirely different process for me, and I will do big swaths of work at a time. Sometimes I'll skip through it, going like, I've got to follow this thread throughout the entire book and make sure that the timing of this works out. And when I say 2 days ago this happened, it wasn't 3 days ago, and so I'm tracking something, all the way through the book, for example. So I'll be skipping through chapters. Other times I'll just be going, this chapter just feels loose and sloppy, and it's not right yet. So I'll just, kind of take this strafing run on a whole chapter, and or a whole section. And so the editing is a very, very different feel and different process entirely. So this is the 500 is just for first drafting. I'm talking about just to get. The first book I did it in a different way. Art in the Blood I did as a NaNoWriMo. So and I think is it 1,960 words a day or something like that. Yeah, I forget exactly the amount that you have to do in 30 days to get a 50,000 word first draft done. So I drafted at that speed for the first one, but I'm finding that this is now 5 books in, so my process has kind of evolved over time. And for me, the tortoise and the hare works. The tortoise works really well for the drafting, as opposed to trying to vomit it out like at full speed, and then because but I often will start really enjoying myself and do way more than 500 words, but it's just that I can stop at 500 and know that I've done a good day's work.
Yeah. Well, and Bonnie, I think you do yourself a little bit of a disservice when you go back and edit for dates accuracy, because clearly Conan Doyle wasn't doing that when he was drafting his works.
Well, he was apparently a very fast writer, and he obviously had a million discrepancies. But I tell you, even when you go into them, like I just described, and even when I have editors look at it, and even when I pay editors before I send it to my publisher, even when I do all that, there's still mistakes in there, and it's just, oh man, I cannot get rid of all of them. And but there's a certain point at which there's a point at which the perfectionism is a detriment to the process. So you have to drop that, especially in the early drafts. You have to just go with spontaneity, and does the dialogue work? And is the story moving along? And do I need some action now because it's starting to sag? And you do these kind of big shape work in a way. And then there's these promises. Once you're writing Holmes, there's a certain set of promises you have to deliver on. So you have to deliver deductions. You have to give them that. You have to deliver the friendship. You have to deliver, I like to deliver some jeopardy, some danger, some kind of physical action. That's not in every Conan Doyle story, but it's in a lot of them. But I feel like with a longer form, the novella and the novel, you really need some action. So I have all these kind of benchmark things that I have to hit, and I just got to make really, really sure that I do. And I think Mark Gatiss said that the hardest thing was the deductions.
Yeah. No question. That is quite a list of elements to have to weave together, a challenge for any writer. So gratified to hear that you're able to pull it off. So talk to us a little bit about the research that went in specifically to this book and your research process. Is your style one where you prefer to do all of the research up front, or do you continue the research as you go through? And what did you put in as far as research work for What Child Is This?
Well, that's several questions in one. The research usually starts up at the top. The first thing that happens when I start a new project is I think of the title, and then I get a title and a theme. something I want to say with this book, and that is something that you don't typically lead with when you're writing genre fiction. You don't lead with theme. You lead with plot typically. But I like to have, because I think once I've pulled Holmes, I've stretched a Sherlock Holmes type story into a novel length. I feel like it needs a little more meat. It needs a little something underneath it that delivers some ideas without being, a polemic, without being, making that a big issue, because it's an adventure fiction. It's fun. But so I start with a thing, which is the theme. So what child is this was the first thing I came up with, was the title, because I love the Christmas tune to Greensleeves. What child is this? And so then I thought, okay, that title seems to think, okay, is there a child that's missing? Is there a child whose identity is in question? So I started to think plot ideas like this. And then I started doing research. Of course, the plight of children in the late Victorian age was, well, it was fine if you're wealthy. But if you were anything short of that, it was dangerous to be a child, frankly. There was a whole story of the workhouses and what happened to children who were orphaned. And there was actually quite a bit of trade in child labor, because children were conscripted into factories. They were used as almost like slave labor in, large houses in the most menial tasks as servants. And they had very few protective laws at the time. There were just, not a lot of organizations looking after them. Now, there were orphanages, and there were people who were trying to help children and so forth, but it was quite a dangerous state to be in as an orphaned child. So, and also this huge, vast disparity between the classes. I mean, we have it now still, but it was far more so then. So, for example, our whole notion of Victorian Christmas, our whole notion really of Christmas, is based on the late Victorian English celebrations, which were inspired by Germany, which this is part of my early research, was understanding that Prince Albert brought in the tree and the presents and the caroling and all the stuff. He brought that from Germany, and that became popular in the royal family, and so it seeped out to the rest of the country. And so our whole romantic notion of Christmas and children singing, or the carols and all the stuff, is one thing. But the flip side of that is, then people were. It was the coldest time of the year, and much colder at that time than it is now. And kids were dying in the streets. They had no shoes, no food and stuff. So, but this isn't a Dickensian tale. But Holmes was living in that dual world, and so I think, that sort of became a background as I researched that. Also, kind of funny thing is that I live in a Victorian building. It was built in 1890. And at the time it was built, right out my back window was the Marylebone Workhouse, and which was mere blocks from where 221B would have been. So the Marylebone Workhouse was the biggest workhouse in London, and huge. And so, I kind of looked into what it would be like to, have a child while you're in the workhouse, and what that would mean and so forth. So some of that research just started inspiring this character and this situation. I guess basically that's how I started it, with that kind of research. And then you asked, do I return to research while working? And definitely. I'll be writing along and I'll go, oh, wait a minute. What kind of jewelry would she have been wearing? Or what, how likely would she have been to take her child out to the street Christmas shopping? And, in other words, I would just start to look at social constraints and things of the time. If we have to look up everything, because it's Conan Doyle was writing contemporary fiction, and so he didn't have to look up what people were wearing. He just looked out the window. So it's an ongoing process during the writing.
We're going to pause here a moment for a quick word from our sponsor. We're moving into the holiday season, and what better time to plan for the gifts that you wish to give, or the gifts you wish to put on your wish list. There's plenty to choose from at MX Publishing. Since we talked to you last, there are scores of new books available on the site. Things like The Valley of Fear, black-eyed theater script by Nick Lane. The Rediscovered Annals of Sherlock Holmes by Terry Gollidge. The English Garden Mystery. That's volume 11 of the McCabe and Cody series by our friend Dan Andriaco. And coming up in the weeks ahead, things like Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Fateful Arrow by Daniel Victor, The Baker Street Archive by Mark Moore, The Hound of the Baskervilles, a Sherlock Holmes reader by Nick Ricci, and dozens and dozens more. Get on over to mxpublishing.com to check out what books you can put on your holiday shopping list today.
So what we should tell our listeners too that, what child is this? We're talking about so much here. We're talking about workhouses and so on, but it's a charming, comfortable, comforting, terrific story, well-paced, and it's just obviously a great Christmas present. But that gets me to Sherlock Holmes and Christmas. One of the things we find when you present Holmes here is that he's not really a tinsel, he's not a fezziwig sort of a fellow at Christmas time. Can you talk a little bit about your thinking about Holmes and his reactions to Christmas?
Well, my reading was that he would have sort of chafed at the kind of enforced jollity of the season, and all, all the, crazed family stuff. That's just not who he was, and he seemed like he wouldn't really have enjoyed that, and it kind of hibernate. At least that's also the impression I got, of course, from the Blue Carbuncle. In the original one, of course, when Watson comes, was it the day after Christmas or 2 days after Christmas, he comes by. So they obviously haven't celebrated together because he's living with Mary at the time. So I feel like Holmes wouldn't be, he wouldn't have a tree and all this stuff. Although I can also imagine that Mrs. Hudson would want to, bring in a little a little warmth and a little spirit into the place. This just seems logical to me that he would not be a big celebrator of all this stuff. But it's, and he is cantankerous at times in the canon, so he's cantankerous here. But yes, thank you for actually pointing out that I'm talking about all this awful Dickensian stuff a minute ago, but in fact, I wanted to create kind of a Christmas bonbon where it's a feel-good book. It really is. That's what we want at Christmas, and boy, that's what we need right now. Frankly, we all need that. And so I wanted it to be a feel-good book, but with some meat behind it, with some some challenges to Holmes in this area. So one of the things he has to do to solve the two cases in this book, in What Child Is This, is he has to figure out some social things, which is not his area of strength. And so he has to kind of reach a little deeper than and do some thinking, some problem solving that is not his normal kind, and yet it fits into his deductive thinking and his observations of people, but he has to reach a little deeper in this one. And I think Watson and we are pleasantly surprised by the solution he comes to.
Yeah, very much. And also, to your point about warmth and so on, and the Christmas time in the Victorian era, and what Christmas in Baker Street might be like. You've got some lovely little touches here, that show the concern that Mrs. Hudson has for her lodger, and the smells and the sounds of what Christmas would be like in Baker Street. I just thought those were wonderful additions to this fast-paced tale.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's interesting because I think, Conan Doyle immerses you in the world, and that's one of the reasons we love to read him. So it's another thing to emulate. It's hubris to emulate this man who's such a great writer, but the way I look at it is each time I'm working on these Holmesian stories, I feel like I'm learning as a writer. So to be able to evoke an ambience like that to put you, to actually transport you to that place with the sounds and the smells and so forth. I mean, he does that, and so it's kind of inspired by his way of doing that. That you get that here, and I do love it. I mean, we all kind of romanticize the Victorian Christmas, I think, but that's when it became popularized, and it became a part of the popular culture right at that time.
Now you spoke a moment ago about learning as a writer, and one of the things that I thought was another fabulous touch in this book, and it's certainly not a spoiler. I mean, we're not talking about plot spoilers here, folks, so you're still going to enjoy the book. But one of the things that you have here is Watson, who is reading Pliny the Elder. And that's because somewhere along the line, he's sort of made the decision to widen his scope of understanding of the world, and he's been given, this book. And indeed, Pliny is sort of a frame for, the sections of the book. You've got quotations here. So tell us a little bit about your thinking about Pliny and about how that features here.
Well, that started as a random choice, and then it turned into something really good, which is the way a lot of research works for me. I'll find something that looks like it might work, and then I'll plug it in, and then all of a sudden it will have extended arms out into the rest of the plot. And Pliny sort of happened that way. We know that Holmes says of Goethe, that he has the pithy quotes. He has pithy quotes. He's often pithy, or whatever the term is. So I think, and Pliny is super pithy. So Holmes likes these, aphorisms, and also he's kind of poking fun a little bit at Watson. And you probably know this yourselves. They're always relatives who, for the holidays, want to give you an improving gift. Something that will help you, and so I think that the notion of Holmes wanting to, improve Watson is a funny one, but also, I mean, it also shows it points up a couple things about the two of them, because Pliny the Elder was a scientist, but also a philosopher, and it's the reason he went to Pompeii was arguable. Like, did he go to rescue people? Was he an adventurer? Was he a Watson type? Or did he go to study what happened at Mount Vesuvius? Was he the science type? This is Holmes type. So there's just a lot of little fun things about that were not intended when I originally picked it out, but that kind of spun out as the writing went on. And so it was just fun. And also I just love that Holmes wants to improve Watson.
No, that's wonderful. One of the things, Bonnie, that I think has always been important to you as part of your presentation to your readership has been the artwork. I mean, certainly the title of your very first book, Art in the Blood, and your investiture in the Baker Street Irregular kind of belays that. And in this novel, in your fifth novel now, you have a new illustrator, a fellow irregular by the name of Frank Cho, and many of our listeners may know Frank from his work from the Marvel and DC universes. I'm curious about how this collaboration with Frank came to be.
That's a fun story. Well, I met Frank at the BSI, and I so loved his beautiful line drawings that he's done for some of the programs and so forth. And that was my introduction to Frank, was his BSI artwork. And I met him, and I sought him out, and I think we sat together at one of the oyster feasts. And anyway, I just really liked him. Yes, yes, one of those. And so we laughed and had a good time. And then he came to London and was doing a signing at Forbidden Planet for a release of a collection of his art. And I thought, I'll see Frank, and we went out to a Sherlock Holmes pub for dinner after. So I got in line with a purchase to get his autograph, and there was all men in this line. It was like, there got to be like 40 people on the line, and I think I'm the only female. And the reason is, of course, because Frank is known as a Marvel comic artist. He specializes in kind of two major, action figures, but mainly big monsters and really zoftig women. So you don't associate that with Sherlock Holmes. And yet his drawings for the BSI and the Sherlockian stuff he did was so fine. So we got to talking, and he was inspired by Franklin Booth, an illustrator of the late 19th, early 20th century, who did this beautiful line work that inspires Frank's style of this kind of line work. And so we got to talking about that. And so then when I came up with the notion and pitched the Christmas novella idea to HarperCollins, I said, what if we, got Frank Cho to illustrate that? They were like, yeah, that sounds fabulous. They were all for that. So I got to bring him in, basically, and then they made their deal with him. And then it waited till I was done with the draft. And then he said, well, what scenes do you want illustrated? And I said, well, you should choose, but I'm gonna give you my top selections, ones I think would be most conducive to, an action scene or whatever. And I used to be a screenwriter. And so, I think visually. I mean, I definitely, and I draw also. So I see the scenes in my head. The movie is playing in front of my eyes as I'm writing, very, very clearly, like I can see every spot of it. And so I said, so I picked out several, and he goes, okay, give me some more. so then I picked out several more, and I really didn't know which ones he was going to choose. And we went back and forth for a while, and then I wanted him to make the choice, though. But then, of course, we were also trying to sprinkle them through the book so they're not all like lumped at the beginning or the end. Anyway, so he made the choice, and then we also corresponded a bit about he wanted some suggestions for certain things like so he said, how would Heffie be dressed? Heffie is she's a recurring character in my books. She's a 16-year-old orphan from whose father was an Irish prize fighter and his mother was a Jewish school teacher. Anyway, she's a very colorful young woman, and she's now got a job with the police, and so she's described as wearing something kind of conservative and attractive, but not very expensive. And he said, so what would that look like? So I made a Pinterest file for him. So we went back and forth with a bunch of examples of hairstyles and, clothing and certain props and so forth. And so, we talked that way as well. So that's how we worked together. And I was so, so thrilled with his work. I ended up buying the originals from him, which I have, and I'm getting framed. And I'm just thrilled that Frank wanted to do this and had a good time.
Oh, that's just marvelous. And I'm so pleased to know that the artwork has a good home. Otherwise Jerry Margolin would be likely to take it from you. And I should note for our listeners, we did speak with Frank Cho previously on episode 188. So we'll have a link to that as well as to Bonnie's other episodes in the show notes there. So Bonnie, as you marveled, pun intended, at Frank's work in your book, were there any surprises to you? Any characterizations or expressions, mannerisms, scenes that stood out to you or that made you surprised in any way?
You mean by Frank's work?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, so he doesn't obviously see them exactly as I do in my head, because I said that I'm a highly visual thinker, and as I'm writing, they are in my head. I can see them. So my Holmes in my head is maybe a little more tousled looking, a little less superhero looking, and a little more sort of thinner and more, I don't know, not quite as macho looking, I guess. But so did they come out different than they were in my head? Absolutely. But do I love them? Oh, totally love them. So his Holmes is almost a Superman character. Very, very handsome, obviously. and his style is inspired by the 40s and 50s comic illustrations, as well as the Franklin Booth stuff of an earlier era. So and what I love about his, and what constantly surprised me, was how he set these things, especially on the full page illustrations, how he set them in a frame. My favorite one is, of course, the attempted abduction of the little boy on Oxford Street. It's just a remarkable. It's a very cinematic, beautiful staging of this. So yeah, he did surprise me, and we talked a lot about Heffie because she's very clear in my head. And actually, his drawing of Heffie is almost exactly how she is in my head, which is just kind of magic. But I really loved his characterization of this very fun girl, and. She's been well liked by the readers, and so I brought her back. But so and I think there's a kind of an important, I can't, this is a spoiler to talk about it too much in detail, but there's a wonderful kind of subtle reveal moment in which one of the mysteries is solved by Holmes, and he just handled that in the most elegant way, I thought. So I was just thrilled with Frank's work, just every part of it.
One of the things that really distinguishes your work over this series is that you've gone to great lengths to almost make them a multimedia experience, because you have a link to things on the website, MacBird.com, where people can go and look essentially at your annotations. And I think they're looking at, some of the fruits of your research. So if they want to see what the Marylebone Workhouse looked like back in the 19th century, you have a photograph there. Do you want to talk a little bit about your thinking about all that and how you can extend the experience of the novel to people by giving them these kinds of annotations online?
Sure. Well, thank you for bringing that up, Bert. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I'm not sure how many people actually go there and look at those, but I've always loved, Les Klinger's, giant 3-volume annotated edition of the canon. That's just, it's got pride of place on my bookshelf, both here and in LA, and every Sherlockian I know has it. And it's just, it's such a delight to be able to pop out and learn a little something about what they're talking about, or what then was, Conan Doyle, as I said, was writing contemporary fiction, so he didn't have to explain these things, but we often don't have the context. So it's just so fun, and when there are pictures, and Les was so wonderful about curating these gorgeous illustrations and so forth. I was inspired by Les, and now this is a pale imitation, because mine are just kind of much shorter things, but I think they can increase the enjoyment. There was some talk of including them in the book, but I felt like that would distract from the sense of just you're reading a fun novel. You're just reading it would pull you out of the immersive quality of the storytelling. And storytelling is the leading effect here. It's over character, over plot, over everything. It's just the sense of being pulled by a story. That's what gives you the transporting experience. And I felt like putting those annotations in the book would disturb that, but I want them available. So there they are. Anyway, I'm still actually putting the ones up for What Child Is This right now.
Well, it's fabulous. It really does add a lot, and I think it was a very wise move not to include that in the book.
So, Bonnie, I have to imagine, based on your previous output, you've got some other Sherlock Holmes books in you. What's next up on your writing table?
Well, I'm working. I'm well into book 6 now. I'm about a fourth of the way into drafting it. And it's another full-length novel, and this one is mostly going to take place in London. have some other locations I want to explore, but since I can't travel right now, I'm holding off on those because I'd like to I'd like to go to the places. I usually do that when there's no pandemic happening. But yeah, so it's mostly London, and it involves, I've got the several worlds involved in it. It has to do with, I don't want to tell about it too much, but it's called A Serpent Under. It's about treachery and deceit and various things to do with that. So it's I'm having a lot of fun with it.
That's great. And that's the one thing I wanted to remark on. I think it's clear from your books that you have a lot of fun in the writing process and in creating worlds around these characters, because it shows in the work. I know you've talked about how you enjoy it, but it actually shows up in how you write about it and the finished product. And I think we all are the beneficiaries of you having a good time at what you do.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Scott. I think that's what they're for. They're for fun, really. They are entertainment. And the other thing is that one of the things I love about Conan Doyle so much and these characters is they're quite funny to me. I mean, it's not blatant comedy, but there is a lot of wit in Conan Doyle's writing, and I just enjoy these characters as they poke at each other a bit and as they remark on the the various people they encounter. It's just I have fun kind of entering into that mindset, and I hope to I hope to bring that to the readers as well, because it's just fun.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I mean, we talk a lot in the Sherlockian world about this incredible friendship between these two men. And I think the point you just raised there is a subtle yet important one. With our closest friends in our lives, we're able to be vulnerable. We're able to poke fun at each other. We're able to kind of nitpick and nag, as well as champion and support each other. It's really about the 360 degrees of what a friendship really is. And I think it's really interesting that you would call that out and note that, because Conan Doyle did it well, and I think you continue in that tradition in your books.
Thank you, Scott. I try to show the reader a good time, basically. Yeah, I mean that's what the books are for me. I mean there's so much for me, really. There's obviously much more than that, and and we, in our Sherlockian world of all our friends who love this so much, there's these deep resonances with various things. The respect for the scientific process, the respect for the friendship, the sense of being a champion of justice and of clearly seeing right from wrong, which is so difficult in modern times. I mean, there's so many refreshing aspects to this to these works. And then the cozy quality of the writing, where you start and end in 221B. There's something that it just so envelops us with a sense of, fun, but also adventure, but friendship, kindness, justice, and just, it's like the world is right in this little world. And you can guarantee that when you read a Sherlock Holmes book or a Sherlock Holmes story, that you will get a good resolution, that he will solve the problem and things will be set right.
Very true, very true. Versus the real world, where things just keep going on and on and on.
Exactly.
It's a wonderful escape. And I should note to our listeners here that we do have a copy of Bonnie MacBird's What Child Is This? As a prize for the Canonical Couplet, which will be coming up in a few minutes after the interview. So you'll want to keep listening and make sure you listen for our clue. And if you solve it and you are selected from all of the correct answers, you'll win a copy of Bonnie MacBird's book. So, Bonnie, where can people find your book and more information about it?
They can find information about it on my website, which is www.macbird.com. But they can get some autographed copies of various places. The Mysterious Bookshop in New York. Of course, Otto will be carrying book plates signed copies. Poison Pen in Scottsdale and Murder by the Book in Houston will also have some autographed or book-plated copies, and they can get direct autographs from Goldsboro Books in London, and then of course you can get them on Amazon.
Or we could just come see you in London, that's all.
That would be great. I would love it. I would love it. Please do come visit. Yeah.
I'd love to. Well, Bonnie MacBird, thank you so much for being our guest and having this wonderful conversation with us here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Well, it's been a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's always fun to talk to Bonnie, and this is such a great conversation. You know, when we talk about her, we talk with her, we talk about everything, including the writing process and the fun of writing and the world of Holmes and Watson. You know, she's so professional, so process-oriented. And I loved her conversation about, her comments about promises in her books, you know, that they will deliver friendship and deductions and the added frisson of jeopardy. It's always great to talk to her.
It really was. And, you know, it helps me, at least, it helped me understand exactly the challenges that Bonnie faces as a writer. I mean, she's clearly having a great time doing what she's doing, so it's not that it's such a labor, but the way she has to coordinate all of those elements and develop a feasible plot and do the research. I mean, it really is a kind of a masterclass in how to approach creative writing.
Arthur Conan Doyle wrote 22 novels. The one he thought his best is an adventure story of knights and chivalry. 20-year-old Alan Edrickson travels the world, encountering bullies, con artists, thieves, a damsel in distress, and two men who become his closest friends. Together they join the White Company, archers and fighters led by the gallant Sir Nigel Loring. Will our hero win the hand of Loring's romantic daughter Maud? Will the chivalrous Prince Edward restore Peter of Castile to his Spanish throne? Published in 1891 and never out of print, The White Company is a tale of pageantry and piracy, heraldry and hope, published now in an exclusive, annotated edition with the original N.C. Wyeth illustrations in blazing color. Don't you owe it to yourself to read Conan Doyle's favorite book? Get the annotated White Company at wessexpress.com.
Oh, you know what that means. Yes, it's everyone's favorite Sherlockian quiz show. That's right, it's Canonical Couplet, where we give you 2 lines of poetry, and we ask to, well, get you to use your brain cells, those little gray cells, and put them to work to figure out exactly what it is that we're talking about here. Because Lord knows, we don't always know what we're talking about ourselves. But the last time we were here for our 250th episode, we gave you this clue. Something killed and something burned, a seal with purple wax. We stagnate in the provinces, but still squeeze out the facts. Bert, do you know what you wrote here?
Of course, that is a famous case. That's the case where Violet Hunter, all alone in the world, comes to Sherlock Holmes and winds up doing laundry for a policeman. That's the case Watson called The Copper's Bleaches.
Yeah, that earned you the sad trombone this time around, Bert. You know, I need to come up with some kind of variance in our sad sound effects here after you make your guess, because just the rim shot and the sad trombone, I don't think, are cutting it. No, that was not it, unfortunately. The answer we were looking for was Wisteria Lodge. And our good friend Eric Deckers continues to add to the hilarity here. He says, aha, I've solved it. It's the story of the school lunch lady who was found face down on a large platter of roast beef and mashed potatoes with a side of gravy. It's the adventure of the cafeteria stodge. Hold on. That can't possibly be right. It's more likely the adventure of Wisteria Lodge. But the good news is we do have a number of people who put in a decent guess, and we will turn to everyone's favorite prop right here. It's the big prize wheel, and we'll give it a spin. Watching it come around, landing on number 67. Number 67. That's a great number. And it sounds like the winner is Rich Kriskiunis. Congratulations. Wow, you are the lucky recipient of a copy of the EBSJ. That's right. You will be able to research and read the Baker Street Journal, every single issue from 1946 to 2011. All kinds of material at your fingertips there to be shared on the screen. So that is great news. Well, this time around, as I mentioned in our interview with Bonnie, we have a copy of her book. What child is this? Not whose child is this? What child is this? From HarperCollins, illustrations by Frank Cho. So if you can answer this canonical couplet correctly, that could be your prize. Another case where someone wants to pay more than it's worth. 5,000 pounds may be enough to travel round the earth. If you know the answer to this canonical couplet, put it in an email addressed to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If you are among all of the correct answers and we choose your name at random, you'll win. Good luck. All right. That should be enough to give people something to chew on. And don't forget that bonus contest that we have for our supporters. Just go to patreon.com/ihearofsherlock to become a Patreon supporter and to unlock that bonus content that only our patrons can hear and read.
Yeah.
Well, Bert, I guess we've done it for the month of October. We have, 4 episodes left in this season. The anticipation's mounting.
Well, that calls to mind one of the extracts from Pliny the Elder that Bonnie uses to introduce the various parts of her novel. And in part 1, she quotes Pliny the Elder, "Hope is the pillar that holds up the world. Hope is the dream of the waking man."
I like that.
Yeah.
There is much to hope for.
Yeah,
from I Hear of Sherlock everywhere. And from the flowers.
And from the flowers, yes. That's the only assurance we have of the goodness of Providence and the adequacy of Pawtucket.
And for you Rhode Islanders, you'll understand that. Well, in the meantime, I remain the very ex-New Englander, Scott Monty.
And I'm still in New Jersey. I'm Bert Walder.
And together, we say, the game's afoot.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.